Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we're talking about playing D&D with kids. Welcome to True Strike.
Howdy, folks, and
Howdy.
welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Woo!
I bet that's a surprise.
We're back, baby.
Who'd have thought? We're talking about playing Dungeons and
This is
Dragons.
the first time we've talked about playing D&D in 2024.
Yeah,
I think it is, actually.
it is. Yeah, it's the first
I said
time.
it
Yeah,
with entire doubt in my mind. I
No,
was like,
100%.
I'm going to throw this out.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about playing Dungeons and Dragons, but more specifically, we're talking about playing Dungeons and Dragons with children or kids.
And what are we talking like 17 and under? Or are we talking like 9, 8?
You know, I think it's all kids,
We'll
all
move
ages.
through it.
Yeah, we're gonna move through it because
Kids of all ages.
Well, that's the thing is that like Dungeons and Dragons is seen in a better light now.
Oh, for
than
sure.
It was like back in the day too, right?
John, throw those little math rocks in the fire. You can hear the screams.
Yeah. It's like it's not nearly as like heinous and like such a dark light thrown on it that it used to be.
Yeah, there's
Like-
still a dark light. But
Well,
we
there's
do
still a
that
dark
intentionally.
light, but it's not like, when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, when I was younger, so like in the late 80s, early 90s, it was still not a thing that like a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And even in the early 90s was still like a thing like where it was looked down upon by like religious organizations and everything
Oh, yeah.
like that,
It was-
like as, being satanic and
Yeah.
devil worship and witchcraft and all that stuff.
Right.
And it was even worse when it was first founded,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because of the whole satanic panic thing. And it just like was always this huge negative thing because people don't understand what it actually was. And it, make believe with rules. Yeah.
Could you believe it?
Could you believe it? Yeah. It's just make believe with rules.
But you're summoning demons, right?
Yeah.
There's
sure.
devils
Yeah.
and goblins.
There is.
Richard, it's terrifying.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's like I said, it's more accepted now, which means people are more open to their children knowing about it and
Yeah.
possibly playing it. Not everybody, obviously.
No.
There are a lot of people out there that are still against Dungeons and Dragons. That are probably still against their kids having anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons. I was lucky enough when I was growing up to have, like my sister, who was the one who got me into Dungeons and Dragons. Right.
Oh.
So when I was young, I had a gateway into Dungeons and Dragons that was somebody that was older than me. Not everybody did it like that. So a lot of
Right.
people started playing Dungeons and Dragons with like their peer group. So people that were of their own age, they decided to get into it and play it. I got into it because I was introduced into it by somebody, who was definitely older than me. So my older sister who was playing with her friend group.
Yeah.
I watched them play and then eventually was all like, hey guys, I want to play the Dungeons and Dragons too.
Yeah.
And she let me and a friend that was in the same age group as me, same class and everything like that, play with them, and that got us into Dungeons and Dragons, and they
Yeah.
taught us Dungeons and Dragons. And I was lucky enough to have that, and also parents that weren't like, y'all summoning demons in there.
Right.
So I was lucky enough to have that exposure.
Yes, but we're learning math.
Yes.
Okay, keep going.
We're learning math and we're learning all kinds of stuff, which, and the learning portion of things isn't really a joke though.
No,
It's
not
real.
at all. You learned what 8d6 can equal real quick.
Yeah, I learned a lot playing Dungeons and Dragons. I
Yeah.
learned a lot via social interaction. You learn that. You learn coping skills. You learn math. You learn cognitive thinking.
We're going to get through these. Yeah.
I learned creative writing.
Yes. Oh, you're between your backgrounds and everything else.
Yeah, I learned
Yeah.
that. I used that in school,
Right.
like later years.
Didn't you do a project for this, right?
Yeah,
You
I
turned
did.
It
Yeah.
based on a character?
Based on a character. I did a creative writing class in middle school, and I wrote stories about characters from our Dungeons and Dragons game. And, like this is, like the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I wrote about this stuff, and I wouldn't have had that outlet or any of that ability had I not played Dungeons and Dragons at a younger age.
Yeah. And as an adult with a dulled mind, I still look back at our campaigns, and we've discussed it before. We don't remember the friends sitting in the room saying things. We remember the characters
Yeah.
in the middle of Icewind Dale, you know, the frigid storm blasting us and just trudging through the snow trying to get through it. We don't remember rolling a constitution save. We just remember the moments in like a theatrical version of it. And for a child, someone with whimsy in their life, that must be like tenfold. Like
Yeah.
I speaking of which, the first time I ever played Dungeons and Dragons, uh actually, were you done?
Oh yeah, no, keep going.
Okay.
I'm enthralled.
Sorry.
I'm waiting for the story.
All right.
Bring me back. Paint me a word picture.
You take my friend group at the time, right? In which we're all still good friends and everything. We just, have moved physically apart for the most part. And we would get together and we'd play music. We'd make short films. We would I'm not going to say Fight Club because you don't talk about it. We'd hit each other. And I remember walking around.
Much different friend group than I had. We didn't punch each
I remember
other.
we never went to like nerd shops, right? We were into a lot of nerdy things. But we didn't go to the nerd shops in areas near where we live. And one time we were in there looking like thugs that were probably going to steal stuff, but we weren't. And we like in the back and we're like, they've got the DMG and player's handbook. I think it was probably like 3.5 or whatever. And we're like, we should play Dungeons and Dragons. And I think one of us was like, yeah. And then the rest of us were like, for real?
Oh.
Yeah, let's do it. And then we went and we bought minis and we bought dice and we spent so much money for this game we knew barely anything about. And then we went back to one of my friend's places and he broke it out because, the rule is if you buy the thing, you're the DM. So that was the sword he fell on. It's a good sword though. Everyone should fall on it at least once. And very quickly learned it. And first time running, we tried to stick to rules as much as possible in the moment. A lot of things we just role played, which is wild because this must be, all right, let's do some math on my own. How old am I? And how old was I? So about 17 years ago, we played this for the first time. And I still, to this day, remember kicking a goblin into this large pit in the floor, knowing that his boss was downstairs. And instead of going downstairs, jumping in and grabbing one of my swords, putting it into the wall to slow my descent, landing on the ground, looking around, seeing the goblin that I pushed down was on the ground, arm had broken off, turned around, and the bad guy, the BBEG, was there, reached down, picked up the guy's arm, and smacked him with it. I vividly remember this. From all these years ago, the very first time I played this game incorrectly. However, is there incorrect when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons?
I was about to correct you on the incorrectly. Yeah. Is there a different way to play it?
Yeah.
And like you say, you remember vividly the story of what happened to not the people that played.
Right.
And that's the same way. When I think back to my first experiences with Dungeons and Dragons, I think back to some of my very first characters that I ever played. And I think back to, Jared, the character who was a Spelljammer. Like we're talking about the original release of Spelljammer.
Yeah.
And we had a ship and we went to planets and we did all these things. We played fantasy, of course, but also Spelljammer, was pretty popular. And we delved into that as well. And I remember these adventures that we went on that were dimensional, space travel, all this fun stuff. And I remember writing stories about it. And I remember not really focusing too heavily on combat.
Yeah.
Like our games,
some of the best moments.
Were not super rules heavy. Like you said, when I first got into this, I got into it because I was interested in the role playing aspect of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we did was role play.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that this has like moved forward with us into adulthood, because I know you and me both are like this. At the table, we stick to the rules 98% of the time, but we're both story first.
Yeah, story first players. Yeah.
And I know every table's different. Some people love the grind fest or the hackathons or whatever. Great, wonderful. that sounds awesome. I will sit down and play that with you and have a great time. When I'm running a game, I'm here for the story. The narrative is what I'm more into than anything
Now
else.
I begin to wonder, am I a story first player because of my origins?
Go back to your origin
because
story.
of how I was introduced into Dungeons and Dragons. Because my sister, DM'd games for us, and her friend also DM'd games for us as well. Both of them story first DMs, not combat first DMs. So that was where I cut my teeth. And when I started playing games without them, we started playing games on the side. They were mostly story first games.
I have a feeling, and I could be totally wrong, that this is how you're going to turn out no matter what. Because you were the guy, you're turning in projects from backgrounds and stories like that.
That's true, yeah.
And you have played war games.
Oh, yeah. I have a heavy background in war games as well, yeah.
We're going to have to get an episode with you and our associate from work and have you guys, throw down some information and opinions on some of these war games.
And that's the thing is that, like, I am, like I said, a story first D&D player, but I love me some war games and some heavy dice math and like combat dice and all that stuff. I love it. I love that type of game. I've been playing it for so many years, but when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, stories.
I need a 1x1 grid to keep me in check. You know what I mean? See that or theater of the mind, one or the other. I have no rulers.
I'm comfortable with the ruler and 60 dice as my choppas.
I'll roll 60 dice.
Going crazy. But yeah, so what it comes back to the original topic, we're talking about children and Dungeons and Dragons.
We haven't left it.
This haven't left it. But I learned as a young age having a peer to assist me. And there's a lot of people out there that didn't have that just kind of got into it when they got into it.
I was in high school. And none of us knew it.
Yeah, you were in high school. So I started a little bit earlier than you because I had the opportunity to be exposed to it earlier, right? And then we talked to people like Dag, right? Who is running initiatives that are designed specifically to say target seems kind of weird in a negative way, but it's not. It's to target a certain demographic, right? Yeah. So you're targeting a younger audience, and it's targeted in a good way because it's getting people into this at an age which could be super beneficial to people in development for all kinds of developmental issues and just for learning in general.
Yeah. And shout out to Dead Aussie Gamer and the Australian government for allowing this to happen. Exactly.
The Australian government enabling him to be able to do this and to provide this amazing service that he does to the public, I think.
Absolutely.
I would love to see something like this in the United States.
The ripple effects of something like this.
It's, and that's the thing is, like, I think of myself as a person, which,
yes, I agree.
I'm a pretty decent person. And I have some pretty decent communication skills, and I attribute a lot of that to what I did growing up and the games that I played and what I, like any creativeness that I have, I directly attribute to what I learned playing these games as I grew up.
What you mentioned it's learning like social cues and like it almost molding your own personality and having different avenues and outlets to try out different parts of your own mind and do these cool role-playing moments with you and your pals and just like feed it back and forth with each other. And I speak natively in my normal human everyday life in terms like, oh babe, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were upset. I have really bad passive perception. Passive insight's really low. Like the thing is, I sound like I'm joking.
It was my dumb stat. I'm sorry.
I genuinely mean this so sincerely. It's my vernacular at this point. It is easier for me to speak
too ingrained
in D&D terms than in normal human being speech.
But yeah, it's a good thing. Because, like I said, it's helpful to a lot of people. And it's sad that some people will never have the opportunity to have this kind of an outlet because they're not in the right groups for it. Their country doesn't have the right support system for it, or there's not enough advocates in a general area.
Looking at you, USA.
Yeah, and that's why I was happy when my daughter expressed interest in what we do. Right, because she saw us playing Dungeons and Dragons, and she saw me playing Dungeons and Dragons, and like character creation and everything like that. And she's like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Can I participate in this? And, made sure everybody in the group was okay with it, and they all were. And she joined our group, and she
Yeah.
plays with us on the regular.
Yep.
So she has exposure to this, and she takes it in a completely different direction than all of us do.
She's
too.
more skilled than all of us.
It's insane because this has opened up a whole lot of creative outlets for her specifically. So I see her, drawing. I see her, delving into artwork even more so because she's more interested in the subject material, which is stuff from our games.
Yeah.
And then also delving into the same thing that I did at her age, which is creative writing. So she's already writing stories about characters that haven't happened yet, and like stuff that she wants to see in games, and lore for days on characters that may never see the light of day, which anybody who plays D&D can relate.
Yep.
Yeah.
But some of the most intense backgrounds I've seen from any of my players have come from her. And I mean, she'll draw her character, right? Wherever she's playing, in multiple poses, different setups and moods, draws in fact, the character she's playing right now, Noric Eiler for Curse of Strahd, she drew their bag and all the items that they had on them and in the bag to so that everything was fleshed out and detailed. And that is amazing. And as a dungeon master, that's wonderful because I can describe her character's items or character in vivid detail because it's not just a word picture at this point.
Oh yeah, no, it's an actual picture.
It's an actual picture.
It's an actual picture.
Back in the day, we called these pictures.
We called them pictures. But yeah, no, it's been great, and I'm glad she's into it, and she's getting her friends into it, which brings in
that's awesome.
Interesting discussion though, because she obviously wants to run games, and then she's kind of nervous about it. She doesn't know if she wants to actually run a game. Doesn't know if she can run a game. I know she can.
She can,
but she doesn't know if she can. So she has approached, me, she's approached you to run games, which becomes a very interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Because being in a family that does it is a lot different, right? And then also being in a peer group that does it is a lot different.
Yep.
So it's become an odd discussion. And I brought it up to you before we even thought of this podcast as a discussion idea, or this topic, I guess, as a discussion idea, is how do you approach children in Dungeons and Dragons? And specifically, how do you approach children that are interested in it, but don't have the proper exposure in a family group situation?
Mm-hmm.
So, she's younger, obviously, and she has friends that she wants to play Dungeons and Dragons. And this is something that, I wouldn't be against running a game for, her and a couple of close friends or something like that, a small group of people, like 5 kids or whatever.
You're giving it back.
Yeah, giving it back. And I'd love to do this. But then the question becomes, how do you approach it with these children's families?
It gets funky.
And how do you get the correct consent required to do something like this, right? Yeah. Because not everybody's family is okay with this sort of thing.
And I mean, if you really, I didn't even think about it really until you brought it up. But my children who also do play, it's more of a straight up just the family thing.
Yeah,
they're a little bit younger, but when they get older, especially my son, I assume he's going to want me to run games for him and his friends. Best case scenario, I can get him to do it because then they're just off to the races. But as an adult, man, are these other families okay with you running a game where you're talking nonsense? Are the kids gonna drop curse words? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of layers to this because you can get to sensitive topics in role-playing games, and you have to figure out where the line is drawn. But now that it's not your own kid, where are the lines drawn, and are they different for not only the individual youth, but how do their parents feel? Now you got to track down their parents and get permission to even do it.
Yeah.
Do you need to run them through all the possible scenarios and ask permission for what you're allowed to talk about? And then what if there's a line drawn and another youth crosses it? What does that mean? There's
so much going on.
Yeah.
And it's weird because you think about it and you're all like, man, things were simpler when I was younger and I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. And was it though? Or was it just because you were playing with your peers and the lines were more known about because you were in your friend group? or that is because your parents didn't know what you were doing.
I like to think kids say and do the darndest things. There's definitely stuff I did when I was younger that my parents wouldn't have approved of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But, I like to consider myself a good kid. I didn't do
It turned out okay.
I didn't do the bad things, but still doesn't mean I didn't know people that do the bad things.
Yeah.
And like, it very easily could have been me.
Yeah.
It just wasn't because of my brain.
Yeah.
But there's just so many layers and rules and things like this and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, my group, all similar age, just got together and decided, let's play this board game. And that's what it was to us, a board game that we just happened to be able to be a lot of imagination in. What does that look like with you? If we were to roll this, sorry, I'll bleep that. If your daughter were to roll this game and had her friends, okay, right? Can they just do whatever? It's just kids talking to each other and being kids?
Well, that's the thing, is that kids are already just talking to each other and kids are being kids.
Yeah.
Right. And arguably, we live in a society that is connected in a different way.
Right.
These days. More connected than we were as children, So if I wanted to see what my friend was doing, I had to call them and hope they were home. Or I had to ride my bicycle over there and see if they were home. Right. Children these days,
top in their
literally, they're on Discord.
Yeah.
Or Facebook message. Discord, most popular amongst the youths.
Yeah.
And they're active in chat groups, which they have many of, and they can just go on and they have an open discussion that's continuous and ongoing through Discord. And they're easier to talk to each other. They have more access to each other than we ever had as children. So arguably, it's easier for them because their flow of conversation is more natural and it's uninterrupted to a point.
Yeah.
So yeah, what does a game look like for them? I imagine it's very similar to, games that were played by me as a child, right? They're going to explore topics. They're going to explore situations that feel pertinent to them. And even if not necessarily on purpose, subconsciously, they're going to deal with topics and things in their games that they, as a person, don't know that they need to work on or maybe want to work on.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what we do as players. There's always a bit of you in every character that you make. Every time there's a bit of you in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use this a form of therapy, and children are going to do that without even realizing it, right? So they're going to approach topics that some parents are probably going to think of as inappropriate, or people are going to still look at as inappropriate, or something that they shouldn't be talking about at their age groups. So it's a really tough thing. It's a really, really tough thing to think about.
You always feel like a grown-up, no matter how young you are.
Yes. Yeah.
Like maybe you look up to the real grown-ups and you're like, one day I won't have rules either and I could do anything I want. Life will be great. I won't have to go to school anymore. But you feel the smartest person in the world. You're smarter than the adults. Whatever, you know everything.
Yeah.
And you're just everything's fine. I don't know. Like if I'm 13, right? And I'm playing this game, me and my friend group, we jive. Oh my God, I actually thought of something else I'll get to in a minute. And yeah, I can say anything I want, especially if I'm like, hey, Dad, can you run this for me? I'm probably not even thinking about because you're my dad. We're basically friends. The same as all me and my friends. You don't even think about what about the fact that he's actually an adult and stuff like this. I'm an adult. We're all adults together. It gets funky. What if all the kids in this group are not close friends? Like, hey, I know a guy who wants to play with us too. Can they jump in? Oh, I guess so. Yeah, my dad will run it for him too. Then what? You don't even know this kid.
Yeah, you don't even know this kid.
It's branching out.
I think that, honestly, we have more tools and more, cognitive awareness as a society than we did years ago when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, as far as, I guess, empathy. It's just a weird thing to say. So
no, it's not.
when
You're right.
when I was a kid and we were playing Dungeons and Dragons and it was me, my friends, my sister and her friends and everything like that, we were as a society a little less aware of sensitivities for other people in the game. So like, somebody and you'd be in a game, and I've been in games like this before where we've had people that have done things in the game that, around a table that you didn't agree with, or you're like, that made you uncomfortable. And you just kind of felt like, well, I kind of have to deal with that because that person is here. And I think we've grown a lot as a society, and especially my daughter's generation specifically, is a little bit more aware of everybody else's in the room's feelings. They can read the room better than we could at that age. And there are more tools available for this. And we see it in games that are now being released where they're trying to be more inclusive and more aware of situations and how they may affect players of the game. A good example of this is Alice is Missing, which we seem to reference a lot.
It's fantastic.
And it's a fantastic game, and it has some really fantastic mechanics. A lot of games have this. It's not just Alice, but one of the mechanics in Alice is a specific card that is put in the middle of the table. And if somebody broaches a piece of subject matter that is sensitive, or they're getting close to an area where they're starting to feel uncomfortable,
right,
they can take that card and place it down on the table, and that
if it's
signals
there, you just touch it,
to signal the other players that, hey, we're getting to a place that I'm getting uncomfortable with.
Yeah,
right.
And that signals whoever's running the game. You can just kind of move. You can transition past
this. Yeah.
You
or
don't gotta go like, oh well, what do you mean? You just kind of
you can transition past this, and there are other mechanics like this that exist in other games that are similar to that as well.
Adorablins
even has it.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily stuff like that just to like signal uncomfortable times, but also for cooldown periods, or I need to take a break because what we're doing here is incredibly emotional, right? Because we're dealing with some pretty heavy stuff. And I'm really getting into this character, and I need to take a break and step away from the table, which is normal now, right? And like that's what I'm saying. It's normal now because we have these tools, and as a society, we're smarter and we're more empathetic than we were back in the day. So like when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was in, like middle school, early high school, like that was not a thing that ever even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
Which was that we're all to play like a table, and somebody being uncomfortable wasn't like a thing that I even thought of. I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, oh, you're uncomfortable? It's just a game.
It's just a game.
It's just a game. Why are you uncomfortable? This is the game. You don't want to play the game, but like,
you go.
We're better than that now.
Yeah.
And we have these tools, and I think that children now that are getting into Dungeons and Dragons would have a better time and an easier time being able to cope with, more adult things, and being able to know better where their lines are and how to not cross them, or know when somebody at the table is feeling a little bit uncomfortable. But again, it all goes back to the whole, like, how do you approach running a game for children that aren't yours? Yeah. It's easy enough when it's in a family group, right? Because, like I have my daughter, you have your kids, you run games for them and you play with them.
Even then, when and I do this for all players, when we start a game, it's important to ask everybody, like, what are your boundaries?
Yeah, what are your boundaries?
Curse of Strahd, like, there's going to be some dark themes here as written. What does everyone have issues with? Are you okay with this, and this? Just that I can adjust it.
Yeah.
And like your daughter, she was absolutely included in that. Like, are you okay?
Yeah, this was all part of the discussion.
And then after and not only did I ask her, I asked you as her father too. Because yes, even in our home game where it was already established that she was a player, she's played with our games before, I still wanted to ask her parents' consent.
Yeah.
That's how to do it.
Which is, I think, where we're at. So I had actually discussed this with you, and I discussed it with my wife as well, and with my daughter. And I was like, well, if I was going to run a game for you and your friends, we're at the point now where it would have to be a consent form, and I would have to talk to the parents involved.
Like in paper? Like, or is this a PDF? A DocuSign?
Well, that's the thing, is that like, do you actually have a DocuSign consent form, or do you just do a verbal consent?
All right. Maybe I'm too loosey-goosey and not afraid enough of the law, I feel like, verbal's fine. Am I crazy?
I don't
Who
know.
knows?
And that's the real question when it comes down to it, is that you have people that, or I have children that are actively interested in playing in a game that I would DM for them. But then I have to, come forward and say, okay, well, in order for this to happen, I need consent from your parents.
I need a permission slip.
Yeah, we need a permission slip. And it's just
This
like
game will include
doing sleepovers, doing, like overnight parties or like everything like that. It's the same kind of a situation, except arguably a little bit more serious because
and this is Discord, right?
Yeah, this is Discord games.
Okay,
yeah,
so
this is
at
primarily
least you
Discord
have that,
games. Yeah,
it's not necessarily in person.
which I mean, you have to do that, right? Like it's like there has to be some sort of their parent or guardian has to know what they're doing, because otherwise, just the implications of that, like somebody walking into a room and their like young child is on Discord and there's some dude on the
Hey,
other
kids.
side of the thing who's all like, "All right, kids, you ready to play a game tonight?" And they're all like, "What are you doing?" "It's Dungeons and Dragons, Mom."
Yeah.
And it's like that's a legitimate fear, right? Is that you're running a game and somebody does not have the proper consent necessary. So their parents do not consent to them participating in a game. And it could be completely innocuous. We could be playing Adorablins, where we're all playing little adorable goblins who are just having an adventure in the Fey realm. But some people are against doing that in general. They're against role play in general, or they just don't understand it enough to know, like, you're going to be tackling mature themes. What is a mature theme to me might not be a mature theme to another adult.
Yeah, or vice
versa. Yep. Yeah.
And man. And there's just, it's definitely, times have changed. More people know about Dungeons and Dragons. More people accept Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean everybody does, especially older generations. The younger you get, the more acceptance there seems to be. And we don't, I don't, this is your child in this instance for this example. I don't know any of those parents.
Oh yeah.
How old are they? Have they played Dungeons and Dragons? If they have, they're probably hype. If they haven't, do you have to explain it? Or are they just like, oh, it's that game where you play as wizards and fight dragons, right? Do they need a costume? I mean, if you want a bit of a costume, go ahead, but it's not necessary. And there's just so many different possible obstacles. I don't know, man.
It's weird.
I don't envy you in this situation.
It is a weird and it's a complicated landscape, which is why I have been pushing my daughter to DM.
The complications are gone.
Because the complications are much less, like
that's
apparent.
Just kids hanging out.
It's just kids hanging out. Yeah. And they're already on Discord. They're already talking. It's just easier if your peer group, if somebody steps up and learns to do it, which is why I've been pushing her to learn to DM, because her friends are really interested in playing. And, it's kind of, you're condoning at that point somebody doing something behind their parents' back.
Yeah.
Because you're all like, oh, you're not going to ask your parents for consent to play Dungeons and Dragons, but it doesn't matter because it's not you're all minors.
Yeah.
There's no adult involved in this situation. So it's okay.
You are just playing a game and hanging out.
You are just playing a game and hanging out.
And it's
such a weird situation. Mm-hmm. It really is. And it would be easier if somebody closer to their age group was willing to step up and do this for them. But then I look at it, and the more that I think about it, the more that I do want to run a game for these types of groups.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know what it can offer children of that age group. And I know that it can offer an outlet, and I know that it can have very serious implications as far as development and helping people in a real way.
Yeah.
And to think that I'm just missing that ability to help a younger generation through something that helped me as a young child, just because it's difficult to ask for consent.
Right.
Is a very tough place to be in.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would be really. Do you know out of this group, how many of them have played Dungeons and Dragons outside of your daughter?
Basically 2.
Okay.
And we're talking like 5. So 2 out of 5. So less than half.
So some experience.
Some experience is in there. Yeah.
This is the perfect time for her to learn to DM.
I know.
Because they're all going to grow and learn together. And I don't know those other 2, but your daughter has a lot of experience at this point.
Oh yeah, arguably the most experience in the group, I think, to
She
run a
could.
game. Yeah.
The first time I ran a game was because my wife asked me to run a game, and I'd barely been a player at that point, even, and it was just like, okay, I'll try, and here we are. Now
Master DM.
it's not a master team. I have ran
Master
more
DM.
games than I've played in.
Yeah.
Like, I think pretty like solidly.
Run so many games.
So, and I can't, I'm looking forward to running many, many more. And I bought your daughter a screen. So now she's really got to do it. She's got to run that game at some point.
She has all the tools she needs to run a game, and that's another thing too, that that it's probably a harder thing for people that want to do this, is people thinking that they need a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And when I was playing games when I was in middle high, we literally had, I think, 3 books. We had the Dungeon Master's Guide, we had a player's handbook, we had, I think, 2 versions of like the Monster Manual and a Spelljammer book. So we didn't have a lot.
You're loaded
of
up
materials.
more than you need, though.
But yes, I mean, we didn't have a lot of materials, but for Theater of the Mind, you don't need a lot of materials.
I've said it before. When me and my kids play, right? They do imagination backpack style. We use, everybody has a D20, everybody has 2D6, and everyone has a D12. D12 is your hit die. Your 2D6 is your weapon damage, no matter what the weapon is, because it's whatever you pull out of your imagination backpack. And you've got a D20 to see if it hits or not. And I let them know what the armor, the AC of the baddies are. And I usually set theirs, I believe, at like 10 to 15, depending on what their level is. I think when they were younger, it was 10. And then as they've gotten stronger, it's gone up to higher numbers. So it's harder for me to hit them. I don't worry about weapon hit bonuses or anything like that. It's just luck of the die. And it works out great. It makes for very fluid games. And it's 99% role playing. But there is still damage numbers. You still you get the 2 6s on your damage die. Like, yeah, it's awesome. And it's so simple. But they are younger and new to the game, and they don't have experience listening to Dungeons & Dragons podcast or know other people that play. So something like that is a new and exciting experience for them, and it's all they know D&D to be. And when they get older, I'm excited to be able to introduce more mechanics and be like,
build upon it.
The game does get deeper, my friends. But, you've already got a couple that already play. You're not able to get away with as much. You just got to jump right in.
Yeah. And like I said, it's something that I am interested in doing. I just don't know how I'm going to do it yet. I know somebody out there has already done this.
If you've done this, please leave a comment.
I know I'm not the first person out here that has had this come up, right? Because there's no way that this hasn't come up before somewhere else. And I know somebody out there has done it, has experience with it. And I would love to know about it, because I want to know how other people did it. Was it a consent form? Was there a permission slip that you sent home, like a field trip?
Yeah.
Like, here, take these to the kids that are interested in playing. I need to get in touch with their parents and or guardians. I need signed consent. I need a phone call of at least 5 minutes length where we can go over the ground rules of what we're going to be covering in the game.
Yep.
At that point, it's Dungeons and Dragons. You can't only plan so far ahead. They're like, I want to know what story my kid's going to be playing through. And they're like, well, they're going to start in a town. They're going to meet in a tavern. That's all I got.
A tavern? They're too young to drink.
They're going to be around the yawning portal drinking mead. No, because underage drinking is bad.
Right.
They're going to be drinking apple juice around the semi-deep hole in the middle of this tavern.
Can their characters get hurt? Is there going to be
that? I mean, these are real important questions. Yeah. I mean, that's part of Dungeons and Dragons. You're killing things. Does it have to be? No, obviously.
The first game I ever
bonk them on the head.
The first game I ever ran for the kids, my son pulled out Cloud's Buster Sword, and he was fighting a goblin and hit it. He got a natural 20. He kills the heck out of this thing, right? Literally, first roll.
Should have been mist of blood.
He bisects the goblin completely in half, and the strike is so powerful, he actually cleaves the tree. The goblin fallen back on, cleaves the tree and goblin in half in one fell swoop, and blood just fountain out of the goblin. And our daughter was like, oh. And I'm like, hold on. The tree thing happens, but the goblin explodes in confetti. And she was like, oh, okay.
That's better.
Whew.
Yeah. He's just sleeping. You've knocked him out. You see small birds running around his head. Yeah. He's fine, though. He'll probably wake up tomorrow and
change his ways
and rethink his whole life. Right. He's like, you know what? I'm not going to attack caravans anymore. I'm a good goblin now.
You've made a friend this day.
Yeah.
And oh man, it's funny. The shopping montages when they can literally just have anything they think of is still great. Like, I want to go buy a panther. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you do have 3 gold from this last mission, so you could probably afford it.
You could probably afford a panther.
But you do teach him a little bit, right? So, good example. She buys a panther. Cool. It's story. She rides it into combat, stuff like that. You know, it'll help her out with certain situations. Son buys armor. He's like, oh, can I get better armor? Absolutely. Guess what, kid? Your AC just went up. Buy one. Daughter, I want higher AC. Should have spent your gold on armor.
You got a panther.
You got a panther. And you kind of like introduce tiny little learning moments, you know?
Yeah. Like I said, that there's a lot to be learned from playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I think it's something that is, you know, should be examined, and I want to do it.
Yeah.
But how you do it? That's the real question.
I think you're on the right track. Whether physical or digital or verbal, you know where I stand. But
yeah. I mean, I would love to do physical Dungeons and Dragons. That's like
I mean like consent.
Oh yeah, physical consent. No, I'm talking about yeah. Like this is most likely going to be a Discord game. Man,
Yeah.
I would love to be able to like have this be a school program. Right? That would be amazing. Where we could go to a public library and sit down and I could, you know, run a game for various age groups where people are able to sign up and play.
Yeah.
Maybe one day that would be a thing that could actually happen.
I'm so happy Dad gets to do this.
I know, it's like living the dream.
Yeah.
It's like such a cool thing to be able to do that, to be able to provide that for a community is pretty cool.
Because every kid you run a game for could be the next you.
Yeah.
Making content. And
the new generation
the game,
of
you know,
love the content creators and
people
just playing the game. Yeah.
Great time.
Yep.
One day though, we should do this. We're
gonna figure out how to make this happen.
We should run this somewhere for somebody.
But if anybody out there has done this and has encountered this before, leave a comment, send an email. Like, you know, if you don't want to comment publicly, send an email over. I would love to hear how you approached it and how it worked out for you, because I'll probably steal all of that and use it.
Send an email. You can comment. If you go to Spotify, you can leave voice messages. If you're on Instagram, you can direct message us. We can really get a hold of us in a lot of places.
Yeah.
But yeah, legitimately, advice, anything would be great. This is an actual real life thing that has come up for us, and we're trying to work our way through it and would love opinions of others, especially if you've actually gone through it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, I've been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been
True Strike.
Bye. Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's any questions you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on X, Threads, or Instagram. New episodes released every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening. True Strike.